you may remember my name is Bob Kovac. I'm the president of CustomerCount, Mobius Vendor Partners. And Toni Neely and I have had a couple of glasses of wine together, not too much. We've had some great conversations, and among other things, we've gotten into the conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, which we all have talked about, trying to learn about. Toni has some expertise developed in that area. Another reason that Toni and I are kind of bonded is we both grew up in St. Joe County, Indiana, which is South Bend for me, Mishawaka, Indiana for Toni. So Toni grew up in a part of St. Joe County that is where all the money is, right, Toni? I mean, you grew up with the big bucks, right?
Well, not exactly, but yes.
Not exactly.
I wouldn't say that necessarily, but I
not exactly.
I lived in a nice area.
Well, Mishawaka, I mean, Mishawaka, South Bend, they in many ways they're synonymous, and a lot of people consider Notre Dame to be part of South Bend when it is not actually. I mean, has its own zip code, it's its own city. But South Bend, Mishawaka, it really, I mean, it's pretty blended. I mean, you don't know the difference when you cross the city line. So enough about that. Let's talk about some real cool stuff. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, unconscious bias, and then what you call the rest of the story. The diversity, equity, and inclusion, Toni, one of the things that I find with the groups that I belong to, trade associations, I usually try to gravitate towards that particular issue because I'm a believer that it's critical. It's critical if you're in business. It's critical if you're not in business, but more so if you are in business, that you exercise those things. So maybe start out by giving us your quick definition of diversity, equity, inclusion. Wait, before we do that, explain Leadership Training Network. Then we'll get into the definition.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm super excited and honored to be talking with you again, Bob, especially about something that we're both really passionate about. And so you are going to find a lot of different definitions of diversity and inclusion and equity, of course, because this is a complex journey for many individuals, for many organizations. But in the end, I think what I'd want everyone to understand is that it comes down to experiencing yourself belonging in the workplace. Let's just keep it corporate right now. You want to experience yourself belonging and having an equal shot at advancement and pay and all of the things. That's where the equity comes in. So, in the old days when this work first started, call it in the early 70s or so, it was called diversity and inclusion training. And it was mostly focused on race, gender, and ethnicity. And so part of the work that's being done right now is expanding that, because there are many, many, many ways that we are diverse individuals. And we want to break down the barriers that keep us separate, really, in the end. If you're different, if you're out of the norm, whatever the norm is in the organization or in the country, if you're not in the norm, you may not have the same opportunities as those in the norm. And so
you know what, Toni, I don't mind calling it what it is. The norm being the white middle-class American, white guy. That,
yep.
To me, that's been the norm, and those are, and in my world, being one of those guys, I know a lot of my buddies that were born on third base and thought they hit triples.
Right. That's a good way to put it. But this work really is, it comes down to awareness of some of these issues, the barriers that exist when you are different, when you're out of the norm. If you're not white, Anglo-Saxon, all the lists of things that are the norm in our country, then you've probably had a harder time getting to where you wanted to be. I mean,
Whether you
whether
want
it's black or brown or woman or, female, whatever the case might be. Go
do
ahead.
people readily admit that to themselves?
I cannot say that for sure. I'll be really cautious about making sweeping generalizations today, because, again, everybody's journey is unique, and I haven't had enough conversations with enough people to kind of make that blanket statement. But I will say this. I will say the work, and I'm going to call it the work. It starts with looking inside first, right? So we have to be aware of and own our own biases so we can manage them. And anybody who's been to a diversity and inclusion class, there'll be some portion of that you'll be doing some work around unconscious bias, right? And it's all about awareness. So notice that it's called awareness of your biases. It's not called, I came here to get rid of my biases, because it's not possible. Every single human being on the planet, this is a spoiler alert, every single person on the planet has biases. The goal is to be aware of them, own them, so you can manage them so that your biases don't translate to discrimination in the workplace. That's really the bottom line.
Well, for somebody who doesn't make sweeping statements, you sure made one there.
Well,
I'll accept that one.
That is kind of hilarious. You're not going to hear me saying anything sweeping generalizations, but
yeah, but that one is one of those things that it's obvious, but I would not have looked at it from that lens. That yes, we all do, and it doesn't matter what culture you're in. I mean,
right.
When I know that when I went to just vacation in France, they had biases that there's an ugly American, and there are times when you could feel it. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago called Women in the Industry, and it's a group of women that mentor, and it's philanthropy. It's a lot of cool things that have to do with helping women raise their game. And I pointed out to these table full of women that I know very well and they happen to be of color. And I pointed out to them that I now know what it feels like to be in the minority. And of course, their first thought was to question me. Mm-hmm. How can you possibly? I pointed out to them, look around the room. Just look around the room. And which helped prove my point that they also had their biases.
We all do. We all do. We were talking a little bit about this at a previous conversation, but I said you come out of the womb and you start getting messages, verbal messages, nonverbal messages, and you challenged me and said, it probably happens before that. I said, absolutely. But all that to say, name the group you've gotten messages, directly, indirectly, about groups that are different from yours and what some of those stereotypes can be. And you start noticing them. You start looking for them, your mind. So I also want to kind of separate, I think we're another layer of challenge for us as human beings is we all want to be good people. And so it's hard for us to acknowledge that we have biases, right? So that whole cognitive dissonance notion where my brain can't hold opposing viewpoints. I'm a good person. I have biases. Nope. My brain's like, no. One of them has. Okay, well then I don't have biases because I want to be a good person. I am a good person. I want to be viewed as a good person. And I think that's part of what keeps us stuck, or at least moving slowly through this journey, is because I don't want to admit that I have biases.
Is that, are we consciously or subconsciously lying to ourselves? Or is that, that could be a little harsh, but
Yeah, I think it just depends on the level of awareness we're dealing with each individual. So again, I couldn't answer that as a general statement, but it really does depend on the individual. But collectively, I think that holds us back as a human race.
are you the person that when you pull up to certain intersections, are you the person that hits the electronic lock button, to lock your car doors? Are you the person on the outside that hears that,
Right.
recognizing that those are two different ends of the same spectrum reacting to the same stimulus?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a perfect example of an unconscious bias, unless you are, of course, aware of it, and you're like I'm aware that there are two things playing there. You might still lean over and hit the lock. It might be consciously, and it might be something that you're doing, that you're not aware of, unconsciously, as it were. But the whole thing is to become more aware of it. Like, catch yourself doing that. It's like, okay, why did I just lock that door? Why did I grab my purse a little bit closer? Would I have grabbed my purse a little bit closer if another woman were, or another white male were approaching me, or was it different when a black man approached me, or a brown man approached me, or those are the types of things that we are challenged to notice about ourselves.
We get to, it's trying to think of a good way to pose this, to put this, but we all have this suffering, I suppose you could call it, or that am I being discriminated against? I mean, I've been in conversations where, for instance, we just celebrated, some of us celebrated the month of the woman, of the female, in March, and celebrated the fact that women are, to be celebrated, and then we go through Black History Month, and we go through those months where we celebrate groups. And I always hear it from one of my wise ass buddies that says something like, when are we going to do White Guys Month? Now, I'm pretty quick to point out, well, we do that every day, but it's hard, but either they have that bias or they don't, and it's very difficult to explain to them. How would you explain it to me that, hey, Bob, we celebrate White Guy Month every day? I mean, what's the difference?
Well, I think I'll say it like this. I think I've heard it best by a colleague that does this work with me. And I think as it relates to white men in particular, saying, what about me? And you gave one answer, which I congratulate you on saying that. Yes, I mean, it has been, the white man has made all the rules and has the power and control and all the things, right? Not making white men bad here. I'm just saying that's just kind of the way of the world. 95% of CEOs and et cetera, we have all the stats. That's why it's so important for white men to understand their place in this journey for themselves and for everyone who's impacted. And we can liken it to if a white male is sitting there thinking, okay, what about me here? Or, well, we've got this diversity initiative now, and we got to make sure we've got room. We're making room for other people, women, people of color, the gay community, people with disabilities. We've got to carve out room for them to come up through the organization too. But that means my chances of growing are going to be diminished because I've got to worry about bringing more people up. To that, I would say, think about the American Disabilities Act, when those people were championing themselves, saying, look, we're going to need a little extra help here to make things a little more equitable. So it's lovely that you people who can see, you have your vision and all that, and can probably even use all your limbs pretty well. You're physically in a different space than I am. Those sidewalks now are great for you, but listen, I can't access the sidewalks. And so with enough people standing together saying, could you make some adjustments here to make it a little more equitable? They cut out the curb cuts, so that people with disabilities, physical and otherwise, could have access to the sidewalks too, and also also enjoy the benefits of having sidewalks in their neighborhood, their cities, etc. So but you know what? The point of this is, other people benefited by that, right? So now the curb cuts were designed to help people with disabilities and lift them up, and so they can enjoy the sidewalks as well. But other people with knee problems or leg problems or hip problems, or you're pushing a stroller, or you want to ride a bike, like now everyone has been lifted because we spent some time on one group to help them out and lift them up, but more people benefit from it. That's kind of the analogy you could make in the workplace, I think.
There's a term that I heard called universal accessibility, and it has to do with the environment, the internal environment. So that if you're building a home or you're building, even if it's a hotel, whatever, it can get down to the color of the paint in the room, because if you have deaf or hearing impaired people in there when they're using their sign language, here, BOB, it shows better in the background. The types of curtains, the types of whatever, and all that's a result of the ADA. I'm equally a big fan of the ADA. I have a deaf daughter who is a PhD in clinical psychology, and I learned a lot from her. I've learned quite a bit from that as an experience. So let me ask you this, and then I want to shift to education. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that in every case, and we just talked about the white guy who says, "What about me? When's it going to be white guy month?" It seems to me that everybody feels like they are a victim of something. And so what is the point at which we stop victimizing and start accepting the fact that this is not meant to point out that you're a victim? It's meant to point out that it's an injustice which can create insecurity, which has its other, a lot of ripples.
Yeah, ask me that one more time. So say that again, Bob.
What's the difference between being a victim of a lack of diversity or equity in the job place, where I feel like I'm a victim, versus you're not a victim? What we're doing is we're solving some issues that have to do with pay, that have to do with the way you're treated, that have to do with your promotions. There's a difference between the two, it seems like. I hope I'm being clear.
I think so. And so I would say there might be the different side of the coin there. So how a person reacts to the changes that are being made, they can either be victimized by it or they can be empowered by it. So that's up to the individual to choose how they're going to react to whatever changes are going on, I would say, maybe. So that's kind of a separate conversation. But what the organization needs to do, or what I would suggest, I shouldn't say needs, but change is hard. And there are layers that have to be uncovered, and so that's why I kind of opened up with, we really have to start with the individual first, and you really have to do your own work. It's an inside out job. So then once I've done my work, and your work never ends, by the way, right? I've been doing this specific work since 2008, and I'm still learning every day. But you got to focus on yourself first, and then you can start moving outside. Okay, so now that I'm focused on me, what impact have I had on my family? What impact do we have at work? What changes need to be made here? I call it lifting up the hood. You got to look underneath the hood and see what's going on with the systems and the processes, practices, right? Because until those things are addressed, and they all have to be addressed. I've got to do my own learning, and I have to do my own work. And then I've got to look at the systems and processes and kind of maybe the belief system that I'm a part of here. Why do I believe these things? What's in place that might be a barrier? Let's start removing these. And that's how you can make the sustainable change that needs to be made. But it can't overnight. And it's
interesting that
there's at least an order to it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that it starts internally, starts with one person, one guy, one gal, one individual. And then meanwhile, there is a company out there that has got a diversity, equity, and inclusion council that's trying to solve for X. I mean, how do they define X? We're back to where that definition comes down to. How do you demonstrate to everybody inside of a company that it's not something that you're working on, it's something that you intend to practice and that you want them to practice?
Right, right.
Is that the order of things?
I mean, you have to start somewhere for sure. And so, the communications around your initiative are as important as the initiative itself. The why. We all have to understand the why. You explain to me why we're doing something, then I'm on board. It doesn't matter what it is. You can talk about that in a million different scenarios, or give a bunch of different examples. But to help people understand the why, and we are on this journey together, and we are figuring this out too. Like the council is going to be charged with hopefully bringing on a competent, knowledgeable, and empathic consulting firm to help them on this journey. But I go back to, Bob, it's got to start, even the council, if those council members have not done their own work, it's just going to stay up here. It's going to stay intellectual. And you really have to go deeper than that and do some really deep dive emotional work to start making a shift within yourself, so that you can come to the council or the organization and help lead change, knowing that you've gone through some of that yourself now, and you do have an appreciation of how hard that is, and you have learned and you have grown, and now you want to help others do the same. But if you're up here and you're trying to infuse it down here without doing your own work first, it's you could be successful, but I would challenge you to think you'd be as successful as you could be.
Well, in my business, the survey business, the customer account side, one of the arguments that we make is that if you're not getting the voice of the customer, or you're not getting the voice of the employee, what you're doing is you're lying to yourself every time you make an important decision. And I would guess that it's the same would be true here. When you form that council, be aware that you run the risk of lying to yourself.
That's a really, really great point, Bob. I mean, you've got to do this. You have to do the one-on-one interview or survey, and you've got to get feedback from the people who are in your environment. What is their daily life like? Do they feel welcome? Do they feel valued? Do they feel like they belong? Is it safe for them to ask questions? Is it safe for them to disagree? Those are all key indicators of how healthy a work environment is. If I don't feel safe here, if I can't ask questions without feeling, dumb or made to feel dumb, or I'm just afraid to push back, there's room for growth. Let me put it that way.
There always is, and protect yourself from lying to yourself. That's really and corporations do that all the time. We see it all the time. I'm sure we do it here. I mean, it's bound to happen when we sit down and we are going through our machinations about what's a new enhancement or product. And, sales guy in me always goes, I love that idea. That doesn't necessarily make it a good idea. So I want to kind of jump over and spend a little bit of time on education. Recently, we've seen in Florida, grades K through 3, you shall not teach, what is gay. So don't say gay. And we see, like in Virginia, there was a governor's race that was won on the platform of thou shalt not teach critical race theory, which I would say that I don't think anybody's been able to define what critical race theory is and what teaching that means. I don't believe that is in any curriculum anywhere in the United States. It's just a good way to rattle some sabers. But from an education standpoint, one of the things that you pointed out to me is everything starts there.
100%. And so while states and cities are struggling with getting what I call the rest of the story into the curriculum, we individuals can take it upon ourselves to educate ourselves. And so I do have some, we'll flip to the slide here in just a bit, but there are many, many books, there are many documentaries. I know there are lots of other publications that you could seek, but you're going to have to be intentional about educating yourself and the people around you, including your children, coworkers, etc. Anybody who might be passionate about this, this is where this topic in particular, these are the resources that I would name if you want a good starting point. And I would start with the documentary 13th by Ava DuVernay. It is eye-opening. All of these are eye-opening. But I would start there. And I would incorporate the rest of these as well. The Equal Justice Initiative, I get that daily in my inbox. It is hard to read. It is really hard. A lot of this will be hard. It's hard for everybody. It's hard for everybody. It's important though to be aware, to be knowledgeable, and to not fool yourself into thinking this was an issue that happened, years and years and years. I mean, it started 400 years ago, but it's very much still going on today. And that is, we're talking specifically about racism in the United States right now.
I, for the life of me, cannot figure out the motivation behind some of the bills and laws that have been introduced. I mean, here in Indiana, there were two of them that I would consider to be really stupid. That and then of course there are some in Texas that say if you want to report a teacher for teaching things that you don't think they should be teaching, so they deputize parents who may or may not agree with what's being taught. And to me, it's it's fostering the very attitudes that you and I just talked about in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, and you can't have inclusion without diversity, and you can't have equity without diversity. And they're not three words. It's got to be an effort. The whole thing. It's either all or nothing.
That's right. 100%. By the way, we're all diverse in our own ways, right? So diversity really should just be the acknowledgement of all human differences, all of them. And equity has come into the conversation as of late, thank goodness, because all things have not been created equally, especially for our Black and brown friends who have been intentionally excluded from a lot of the laws and systems and processes that were built to lift up a population. Well, they really only lifted up the white population. And that's where the book, The Color of Law, comes in. I mean, I would race home and I would watch the documentary 13th, and then I would get the book, The Color of Law, and you will be astounded of how intentional roads were built and mortgage loans were set up, and the redlining that's gone on. And I mean, if people are still unsure of whether or not they believe in systemic racism, read the book, The Color of Law, and it will open your eyes.
One of the things that Pete Buttigieg is, I mean, he mentions and he talks about, and he's a real apostle for pointing out the fact that highways were built to, in most cases, to actually divide communities. I mean,
yes.
Poor people on one side, rich people on another, Black people on one side, white people on another side, and how it was intentional. And part of this new infrastructure bill is going to be used or designed, I should say, to stop that, and put those roads where they need to be, not to intentionally divide cities.
For sure, or destroy communities, which is, if you want to take it one step higher,
right.
A lot of the highways were built to just annihilate, especially Black communities that were starting to thrive. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's
well,
unbelievable. people.
So let's hope that this little chat has made people aware of what, can be done, should be done. And so what I'm kind of looking forward to now is you and I can have a little bit of fun on something. And that is, this is that segment where I focus on my guest's charity of choice. And the charity of choice, I usually contribute $50 for it, in my way of saying thank you for spending your time. You have chosen, and by the way, I'll explain to you how this is going to be germane here in a second, but you've been in the hospitality industry. We serve the hospitality industry. And one of the things that you are encouraging is, particularly these days, is the hospitality service employees, waiters, waitresses, bussers, predominantly in the restaurant hospitality industry, to tip well. Tell me about that. What's up with that? And then I'll share a story or two.
Sure. So first of all, I really think it's important for, if I could say, everyone has to be a server at some point in their lives, so you can understand, or in the hospitality industry on some level, to really understand the hard work that goes on behind the scenes. I would first say, if you're successful in this industry, I feel like you can do anything. They are hard workers, professional, and the tipping industry in the past is it's tough. It's a tough way to make a living, and not everybody's mindset is at a place where some people won't tip at all, or some people are still tipping 10%, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was a server many times throughout my life. I went back to serving during the Great Recession in 2008 to 2010. I couldn't find a job. Thank goodness for the service industry at the time, who lifted me up again so I could pay my bills, et cetera, et cetera. I just have a big heart for all people in this industry. And so since I was a server, but now even beyond, especially since COVID hit, I am just over tipping all the time, like leaving a tip and then walking by, and I'm not doing this every time, but I'll leave another 20 on the table, or shake their hand and say thank you for the amazing service, and leave a 10 behind again, or a 20, or something to go above and beyond. Because when you're in that position, and I remember even when I started serving back in the 80s, late 80s, somebody put $1 extra on there on top of the 20% tip. That changed your entire experience that evening. Like, oh my gosh, thank you for that extra $1. It means everything, because every single dollar counts. Every single dollar counts. And so while I still give to United Way and Special Olympics and do the walks and the runs and all the things, I'm just really, all my extra money is going to the service industry right now. Oh, above and beyond what I'm already tipping. I'm tipping on top of my tip.
We do to force that a little bit. I host a business equity dinner every year for Ball State University students coming out of a certain capstone class, and it's always at a fine dining restaurant, someplace here in Indy. In fact, this one is coming up next Monday. And one of the things that I tell them is that everybody has to have a $5 bill. And the reason for that, what I don't tell them until they're there, the reason for that is I'm going to pay the bill, and I'm going to do the tipping, and I'm going to do the minimum of 25%, even though they will add 20% onto it. I will always add more onto it. But I tell people that that the $5 is to put under their plate. It's $5 extra for that server. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, you make their day. Cash is a lot more important than a credit card.
That's
but
right.
The other reason is there's a good chance the next time you walk in that restaurant, that server's going to remember you. They may not remember your name, but they're going to probably remember your face. And that can make a big difference if you're in a business environment at a dinner. And it certainly makes a big difference in their life, and can make a big difference in your life. So
absolutely.
Yeah, man, tipping is a big deal. I grew up
Love
in the retail flower business, and it's funny, nobody ever tips the flower delivery guy. Nobody. I delivered flowers in my parents' flower shop forever. I mean, from the time I could walk and hand a plant to somebody, and nobody ever tipped, ever.
Wow. Wow.
Well, they're not expecting the flower delivery guy.
Yeah, right. True enough. True enough. But see, you brought awareness to that today. So now maybe people will start tipping when they get flowers too. Wouldn't that be nice?
You never know. I'm going to send you some flowers. We'll see.
I'm up for the challenge, Bob. I'm up for the challenge.
I'll take the flowers.
For sure.
Hey, this has been fun. So Leadership Training Network, you mentioned earlier that it's good to bring in a professional consulting firm. Just a couple words about Leadership Training Network. What would you do for me?
So I would take you through probably in chronological order. Let's define diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let's have you do your own work around that, and so that it would include some experiential exercises. Because again, if we just talk about these things and keep it intellectual, and you don't have the experience of, wow, maybe I do have some learning here. Wow, did that just come? Did that just come from my head and onto this piece of paper? Just helping people along in their awareness journey. So that you can, in fact, basically own and manage your biases so it doesn't turn into discrimination. And so I wish I would have done this work when I was a leader in my previous organization. I would have been a much more competent leader, and I would have been more aware. I would have been able to look for things that I didn't know to look for then, from hiring and recruiting and all the things that kind of go with building a really healthy, inclusive organization. So I would just come alongside of you and work with you and your team to help own your biases, and then what does that look like for the organization moving forward? How do we really, maybe we have a pretty healthy relationship, but how do we get better? There's always room for improvement. So.
Well, and as the owner of a professional consulting firm myself, I spend at least 50% of my day explaining to prospects why they should outsource to professionals. There's a real value to bringing somebody like me in, because I'm going to be a lot more objective. And in your particular case, you're going to keep them from lying to themselves. And that is, to me, that's big companies, small companies, even at the flower shop. We didn't know if gladiolas were going to sell that day. We just bought gladiolas, and
right.
It's what we would be pushing that day. So,
right.
Hey, Toni, this has been an absolute hoot. You can see Toni's email address. I'm sure she'd be happy to entertain any questions that people may have.
Absolutely.
My LinkedIn profile is the second one down there, and I'm also happy to answer any questions. Toni, I'm going to shut off the recording, and then you and I can wrap it up. And I just want to say thank you so much. This has been really wonderful. I really enjoyed this.
I enjoyed it too, Bob. Thank you for having me. It's been an honor.
You're very cool. Hang on.
You're cool too. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.